Good afternoon, everyone. I guess we've still got a couple of minutes waiting for the last people to be joining. So thank you all for being on this webinar today. It's really lovely to have such a diverse audience. I'm looking at everyone. So whilst people are kind of connecting and joining, I guess that I can maybe intro as to what it is that we're going to be focusing on today. So this webinar was born out of the idea to help startups navigate during this tricky pandemic environment. As a result, we've got a great panel of startuppers to inspire you all today, with actually a startupper herself. So Olga is the founder of InModi, and she's going to be moderating the panel. You can see her on the camera also. What we wanted to show you is 3 different ways to succeed in these difficult times. So it's the idea to adapt and change your business, take a risk, and then maybe tips and tricks when fundraising. I'm going to be kicking off this session by giving you an overview and kind of a perception of the Swiss M&A market through my Intralinks prism. Then Cedric is going to run you through the venture capital report, and then we're going to kick off the panel. So the panel is going to be running through for the next hour. We will be recording this session and posting it, and any questions you might have can be submitted in the chat button or at the end when we actually have time for the Q&A. So for those who've joined, welcome to this webinar. The idea is for it to be interactive and really make the most of the wonderful panel that we've got going on today. I'm going to run you through my quick uplook of the market. So a quick introduction. My name is Magali Neve. I'm the manager for Switzerland and Austria for SS&C Intralinks, which is the largest fund administrator. We focus on secure file sharing for strategic transactions such as fundraisers, IPO and sell sides. And we're based in Zurich, where I'm actually currently sitting. Not supposed to be at the office, but wanted a bit of peace and quiet today, so decided to come to the office nonetheless. Today, I really wanted to give you an idea of the market share that we've got. We work on 217 transactions in 2020 within Switzerland alone. We have a strategy team who does data and trend analysis, and we work on quarterly deal flow predictors, both regional and worldwide, and restructuring reports. We really see that this pandemic has actually taken a smaller toll on Switzerland than other neighboring countries. The number of transactions was only down 20% in 2020 versus 2019, and there was no mega deals done other than the Sunrise one. The good news is that 2021 is already kind of picking up. So we've seen an increase in 27% in opportunities, meaning that we really think that there's confidence growing. And where investors were maybe hesitant in 2020, this is no longer the case in 2021. We estimate that the Swiss market will do well, abiding to the usual 250 to 300 transactions closed annually. The transactions that we're currently seeing really have a focus in the biotech pharma space, as well as industrial and retail. I was actually listening to an MD of Lazare last week who used a great analogy, so I'm going to share it with you. And the analogy was the current situation. In the last 12 months, we've been adapting to a pandemic. We've boarded a flight, right? So we're on a plane, and we've been mostly saved from economic meltdown through government and aid stimulus. And the coming 12 months, so 2021, will be a turbulent plane ride, but the plane won't crash. It's only in 2022 that we're going to have a clear picture as to whether there's going to be a softer landing or a crash. And we don't expect to see a sudden huge increase in restructuring or bankruptcies before then. So only once the skies have cleared, then we'll kind of be hit by a harder truth. So the idea today of 2021 should be a year of planning, resilience, changing and adapting business models, and investing wisely. We believe that investors will no longer focus on the bottom line and rather look at teams, human factors, and organizational structures. This really, I think, leads nicely into the next part of the webinar, which is going to be focusing on the Swiss Venture Capital report that will be presented by Cedric. Thanks.
Many thanks, Magali, for the interesting introduction. I also would kindly welcome you from SECA's side for this joint webinar together with Intralinks. I'm happy to introduce a spotlight about the recently published venture capital report, which was disclosed on the end of January 2021. Before we will open the panel discussion led by my colleague Olga, I want to summarize the key findings out of this report. If you want to learn more about the report, you can download it on startupticker.ch or on the SECA website directly. The current report clearly shows that COVID-19 also leaves traces behind it in the venture capital and startup scene. For instance, investments in startup companies fell by 7.4% to 2.1 billion in 2020. The drop was mainly caused by a lack of the mega deals, i.e. venture capital investments above 200 millions, which haven't happened at all last year. While the cumulative volume of venture capital slightly decreased, the number of financing rounds increased by 14% to 304 rounds. In terms of sector, there was a clear shift from ICT towards life science startups. Whereas investment in ICT fell from 1.2 billion in 2019 to 720 million in 2020. Investment in biotech startups increased by 31% up to over 800 million, which is a record year volume. Despite the slight decrease of total venture capital investment in Switzerland, it has to be noted that 2020 still was one of the best years in history after the record year 2019, not only in Switzerland, but also in other European jurisdictions. Also 2021 started very promising, and the outlook seems to be still very positive, considering also the latest media coverage and also what we have learned and see from Magali before. And this, again, not only in Switzerland, but also in other European markets, it seems that there is enough dry powder available for startup funding. There is also record high numbers of new startups founded in Switzerland. Venture capital investment will probably reach again new record levels in 2021. And the fundraising process of venture capital funds does also look very promising. Here you see an overview of the development of total investment in venture capital over the last 8 years, and also the red line, it's investment in terms of Swiss francs, which you see the slight drop from 2019 to 2020, but still on a record high level. And it clearly shows that the Swiss venture capital market is resilient, and there is a lot of cash in the market to be invested. Thus, unlike other crises like the dot-com crash in 2000, 2001, but also the financial crisis 2008 and 2009, it seems that there is no lack in fundraising, especially not in the venture capital world. Therefore, my first question to the panelists is, if not the fundraising, what were the major challenges during the last few months? I'm very much looking forward to listen now to the panel discussion, and therefore I'm happy to hand over to Olga, who has contributed a lot for today's event. And yes, Olga, please go on with the panel discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Cedric. Hi, everybody. I'm going to be your moderator for today. I'm very excited to introduce to you three very bright representatives from our startup community. They have lived through all the ups and downs that this pandemic has brought to us, and were actually able to successfully navigate this roller coaster. So let us learn today from their experiences, and at the end of our discussion, they will be very happy to answer all your questions. As our first guest, I would like to introduce to you Dmitry Nabatov. Dmitry is the co-founder and CEO of an ETH spin-off, Advisor, which develops artificial intelligence to help companies measure and improve digital collaboration, communication, and customer experience. Advisor is a Microsoft Gold partner and also the winner of the Swiss Microsoft Partner of the Year Award 2020. Currently, Advisor serves some of Switzerland's largest companies such as Basler Insurance, SBB, and the Mobiliar, among others. Dmitry and his team have already lived through two pivots, not pandemics, one before the pandemic and one during. So Dmitry, welcome. We are very much looking forward to your story today. As our second guest, I would like to introduce to you Dr. Markus Riester, who is the co-founder and general manager of a Berlin-based medtech startup, Midge Medical. Midge Medical is developing digital blood diagnostic devices, making blood testing accessible, affordable, and even available directly at our homes. Markus is a serial entrepreneur. He previously built up a company developing 3D nanoprinting equipment and was, among other things, the head of research at the AT&S and senior scientist at Motorola. Markus is also a partner at Meisterwerk Ventures, a company building medtech startups. He holds a PhD degree in chemistry and has over 14 patents. Now, Markus and his team have managed to completely pivot the focus of their medical technology during the pandemic, which is actually especially difficult given the complexity of medical innovation. So Markus, we're very keen to learn today how you actually managed to do this. And last but not least, I would like to present to you John Roberts, who is the co-founder and director of Minalto Advisors. The Minalto team provides expert M&A advice to companies and investors across the global tech ecosystem, and have completed transactions with some of the world's largest corporations, such as Alibaba, Facebook, and Google, among others. John himself has completed over 30 transactions, including 15 involving European companies. Before relocating to Zurich in 2019 to establish Minalto's European presence, John lived and worked in the Bay Area for 7 years. John, welcome. You have direct insights into how the leading tech buyers have navigated this pandemic, so we are very much looking forward to speaking to you today. Dmitry, I would like to ask you to unmute yourself and show yourself to us. You're first. Before the pandemic, you were focusing on completely different clients, solving a completely different problem, focusing on HR and corporate culture. Can you please tell us what happened to your business when the pandemic hit?
Certainly. Thank you very much, Olga, for the introduction, and generally thank you everybody for having me here. So the pandemic was actually, it's great that we don't have two pandemics to begin with, Olga. I was a bit shocked to hear that, but we have one pandemic, and what happened is it's the following. It's actually a funny story. So when the pandemic hit, we were in the closing phases of a large international client, prestigious client, very important deal for us, because it would kind of bring us the revenues we needed to hit the next milestone, but also it would be able, or it would allow us to raise the, let's say, the next round based on that news. And all of a sudden, this particular client calls me up and it's basically breaking up with me, telling me, listen, we had to cut 70% of our budgets because we needed to allocate the budget to, let's say, the essentials, right? To the essentials. And that was a really interesting phrase. But at the time it was like, boom, this particular client calls me up on the phone, basically breaks up with us. And we invested quite a lot in that. We built a relationship, involved all the stakeholders. We had kind of the budget allocated to us. But unfortunately, that didn't happen just once, but multiple times. So all of a sudden, we didn't have, the revenues to kind of that we projected. We didn't have a persona who seemed to have the budget, and we didn't have, let's say, the runway nor investors to kind of get to the next point. So that was a particularly interesting situation for us. But that's how COVID hit us.
So when you realize that your key contacts don't have the power anymore in the organization, nor the budget, what happened then? Did you start to panic? But as I know, you actually successfully were able to refocus on customer relationship management, right? Yeah.
I mean, look, what happened is our initial persona, let's say the head of HR, for them, it was a paradigm change, right? The situation completely changed. They had to refocus priorities, go into solving other problems like employee safety. And we kind of understood that it was a paradigm change for everybody. And we decided to kind of be agile. And the first thing we did is we said that we need to understand the new reality. What did the pandemic cause? Where did things shift? What are we looking at right now? How's the market? So we wanted to see what else in the market is there in terms of important problem that has money allocated to it to be solved. And our buyers are and were always enterprises. So we kind of we were in this B2B setting and needed to get in touch with these people, which is quite difficult. It's difficult to reach the big enterprises and just talk to them. So what we did is we employed or did an automated LinkedIn bot, which would reach out to a specified persona and just ask them if they would join for an interview to compile a report on the latest trends and best practices during or after COVID. So this is what we did. This was our strategy to reach out to enterprises, to get the information in, to understand the new reality. And so our bot would reach out to maybe 3,000 people on LinkedIn across 5 different personas. One of the personas was still our initial persona, the head of HR persona, but there was also different personas. And one of them was the head of customer services. And we asked these people basically 3 questions. What is your current state? Where are you today? What is your, let's say, desired state, meaning that where do you want to go? And what is the biggest roadblocks that you currently have? And people, 120 people agreed to talk to us and tell us all of this really important information. And we realized our initial persona, the HR persona, they didn't have any budget left for what we were doing back in days. But there was a new persona, which is the head of customer service, which was really interested and had really interesting desired states, because everyone was focusing on the essentials, and the essentials in enterprises is always keep your clients, right? So we ended up with this very interesting head of customer service persona who had the budget and had the urgency to kind of keep their clients. And on top of that, they were suddenly working from home, meaning that all of the agents, they had been reallocated to their home offices, and there was literally no way to do quality control for all of the agents for this, let's say, new persona. And that was the point where we basically turned around 180 degrees and pivoted towards that direction, because there was the urgency and there was the money allocated, and we didn't need to derive too far away from our initial technology. Sorry for the lengthy explanation, but it was very emotional for us, so it stuck with me.
Can imagine. And now, what is the problem that you're actually solving with your tech?
Right. So the problem we're currently solving is automate quality control in customer service units. That means making sure that every agent communicating with the customer is always client friendly, always empathic, always providing a solution. Doing that very quickly and doing that optimizing for NPS and first contact resolution. So very specific to that persona and not to our initial one.
Super. Thank you, Dimitri. One thing is pivoting, a fast-paced tech startup, but what about adapting medical technology, which sometimes requires years of validation? Marcus, I hope you're ready to help us and teach us how to do it. So before the pandemic, I know that you were fighting antibiotic resistance, but then your team managed to do an incredible pivot right at the start of COVID and even managed to raise 5 million in equity. How did you pull this off?
Yeah. Maybe we should mention at this stage, Olga, that you were involved there as well. Part of what we did initially, and this is what Midge Medical started out with in 2016, 2017, is we had developed a concept of how to bring diagnostics from the lab or from the doctor to the home. So people can actually do delicate diagnostic work at home, but do that in a safe way, in a reliable way. That includes much of thinking through how is a so-called pre-diagnostics being executed? How can we help people to do this correctly? How to take samples? Everyone's aware of how to swab today. Yeah, so you've probably all done it yourself, or you had it done by a doctor. So automating these things to a degree where it's simple enough to be used at home is at the core of what Midge Medicals is doing. When the pandemic hit pretty much a year ago, we sat down and said, well, it's good what we've developed so far, an automated blood test that can be done at home. However, I think there's something much more urgent at stake, and we should be looking into how we can do SARS-CoV-2 testing at home. One of the things that we had seen is that, of course, there are anti-gene tests, antibody tests were quite en vogue at in that time. But this is something where we said, this is not what we actually need. We need to bring the PCR test to the home. So be very precise, be precise about the result, be precise whether you're positive or you're negative. And this then led to discussions with people in the community that at that stage we had not been in contact with. And we just asked them, how do we do a PCR in a device as small as this? And we got some answers that led us to pitch a test of about the size. You can see the now developed device in the slide here. And it led us to doing that development over a course of probably 10 months until the device was finished. We are currently finishing the final touches of the test cartridge itself. So what the person on the slide is holding in the right hand. And And Olga, then what you rightfully said, we have to certify this technology. So, and that's maybe one of the curiosities in medical technology. Even though you might have a running test and your confidence is at 150%, you still need the certification to be able to sell it on the market in the use case at home. No? And I think understanding how to do that, we do have a great team that's been involved in medical technology for sometimes decades. If I look at what support we have on the quality side, what support we have on the digitization side. You know, so the whole device is not only measuring a signal positive for COVID-19 or negative, but it's actually digitally connected to a cloud service. So you can actually transfer the results immediately to your doctor or to the health authorities, depending upon what the legislation in the country you're in mandates.
And your first, let's say, clients, who are these going to be?
Again, the long-term vision is to enable those tests for the layman. So you can do the tests at home. From a regulatory perspective, we currently are mandated. This is both for Switzerland and the EU and most any other legislation to have healthcare professionals work with the device. Now, so doctors could use it. Or trained personnel could use it. So there are both the settings in the healthcare system, but also settings in a private system where you could, for instance, have doctors in companies apply the test to their personnel. You know? That's also a possibility. Going to the end customer, this is of course the final goal, and this will require some more intricate certification processes that we will start in the near future.
And the focus that you had previously on C-reactive protein level detection, are you still pursuing this this focus, or it is on hold for the time being?
No, absolutely. We have put this on the shelf for a couple of months, but actually are starting to pursue this again. We are seeing substantial interest in the technology as a as co-diagnostics to the molecular tests that we have developed. We can actually add this I say packaging technology that's fully automated, that gives you in a fully automated way a blood test result to, for instance, track how your SARS-CoV-2 antibodies are doing over time. So it's something where you don't have to go to the doctor to get a result, but you could actually do the test at home. This has actually been in focus with some of the investors that we are talking to.
And I mean, how quickly were you able to actually, with your team, make the decision to refocus? Was it like one day gut feeling, let's go for it, or you had to really convince the board, convince your investors to refocus? How did that happen?
Yeah, I would say about exactly 1 year ago, Michael Diebold and I, so the other managing director, we had sat down together and discussed this option of going for a SARS-CoV-2 test. And of course, this was a very timely topic. So our shareholders and potential investors that we were discussing with at the time, they were all quite excited when we came up with the idea of pivoting from CRP to SARS-CoV-2, from antigen, if you wish so, to a molecular test. And they were really excited. So within 3.5 weeks, we had succeeded in getting the funding that you had mentioned. The decision was done, I would say, in about 3 days after we got the initial information, and we said, well, let's go for it. Now there's no better time than now. Yeah. And we're glad it worked out. Yeah.
Great. Very happy for you. Now, of course, not all startup teams were able to pivot as successfully as Advisor and as Midge Medical. Jonathan, you're there. You've seen both sides, the distresses and the successes. What type of companies you saw were able to adapt and grow quickly during the pandemic, and which kind of startups are still struggling and will be struggling for a while?
Sure. Yeah, it's hard to be the bearer of bad news after hearing two super positive stories of companies that were able to really adapt and thrive through the pandemic. And I would say overall, of the many companies that I've come across, whether that be clients or even just friends or kind of partners that we interface with, the vast majority have been incredibly adaptable and shown great perseverance through the pandemic. So I would say, kind of as an asset class, the startup asset class has proven to be incredibly resilient. And I don't have as much experience on kind of Marcus's side because our firm focuses on IT specifically. But from what little I understand, that's kind of been unilateral across, whether you're life science, tech, IT. And I think that in part speaks to kind of the quality of the leadership at a lot of these companies. I think you've got a lot of founders who are very experienced that have been able to weather through some of these storms. But I also think it speaks to the investor base. I'm not sure if this pandemic would have happened 10 years ago, if you would have seen the same level of support from private investors, all the way from angels up through, very large venture capital firms, and then layered on top of that government support to really make sure that these companies are capitalized to be able to get through, kind of a 12 to 18 month time period. I actually thought what the Intralinks presentation showed was interesting, and I think it was Lazard maybe that she was quoting when she said this, but we may not see the full fallout until 18 to 24 months from now, because you have had so much government support, subsidies, and depending on which geography you're in the US, it was the PPP loans. There were programs in the UK and Switzerland, Germany. And so actually, by and large, there have been many fewer failures than we anticipated, candidly, kind of going into the beginning of March last year. And so my March time, while people like Dimitri and Marcus spent their time kind of understanding where they were going to pivot their business to, a lot of my time was spent trying to help investors and founders and others assess what their options were. So I always say we did more free consulting work during the month of March than we do in a typical year, because there were so many kind of unique problems and challenges to think through. Everything from companies whose revenue had fallen by 50% effectively overnight, to companies that maybe were 95% of the way done with an M&A or a fundraising and then had that option pulled away from them. And so we spent a lot of time trying to connect those companies to people in our network or give them additional ideas. Sometimes it was just, I'll say, emotional support, to help them get through. But ultimately, it's been really impressive to see how, again, kind of as an asset class, the startup asset class has really, in many ways, kind of thrived in spite of the pandemic. Now, I know there are still companies that are struggling, and I would say if you're in a sector that is reliant upon human movement, so, for example, if you're doing things around travel technology, or maybe you're selling, booking or reservation systems for restaurants or gyms or spas, a lot of those pipelines have been extended, those sales cycles have lengthened. And as a result, you may not have seen the uptick that you anticipated at the beginning of 2020. But those businesses are still around, and many of them have adapted their go-to-market, or at the very least, they've capitalized themselves to be able to make sure that as we, knock on wood, hopefully are starting to exit the pandemic time and return to some sense of normalcy, they have the capital to really be able to turbocharge their growth again. The other sector that I think has been hit a little bit harder than others because everybody's aware of the Zooms and the sectors that have been big beneficiaries. But I think some of the deeper technology companies, because a lot of those companies, especially if you're doing something around visual technology, acoustic, sound, some sort of sensory input, a lot of times demoing your technology is critically important to getting buy-in from partners, investors, even potential acquirers. And it's really hard, for example, if you have, let's say, technology in a VR headset, you can't really replicate that experience over Zoom. So that would be something where you really do need that in-person experience to be able to see what makes it special. And so I have seen those companies take a little bit longer to come back. But again, a lot of them have kind of doubled down on their R&D efforts and said, hey, we're going to take the money that we would have spent at CES or we would have spent traveling, and we're going to, hire a couple more engineers to really further the technology through this period of time.
Wow, so it's basically the deep tech startups that need to go back to their R&D activities right now. So not only the sector played a role in defining which startups will succeed during the pandemic, but also the team adaptability, as you heard. Dimitri, I know you applied a so-called report method, which allowed you to pivot in 2 months. Can you tell us more about this?
Sure. I'm not sure if there's a real name for it. Let's just call it the report method. But basically, I touched upon that already. So if you need to get in a lot of information to do a decision on your pivot, you need to have some sort of kind of scale. What we did is we used LinkedIn and a bot basically to reach out to as many potential buyers as we could. And we then run, whoops, I have a little bit of an echo. Seems to be gone. Awesome. We run 120 interviews with potential buyers, and we really try to understand these personas on a deeper level. What is the KPIs that they're looking after? What is what keeps them up at night? What priorities do they have, etc. I mean, we went even as deep as looking up what their hobbies were on Facebook. Really understand the persona as well as you can. And we kind of started getting a sense of what works and what wouldn't work after that. And there was one moment where we would speak about recontact rates in our own language, but the target persona would speak about FCR, which is essentially the same thing, but just expressed in a different way. And once we understood also their language, then we were suddenly able to connect on almost a buddy level. They were like, they took us in as friends or as their peers, and that was really big. But we also understood their biggest fears. And after running these 120 interviews, we basically called the interviewees once again, and we offered them to walk them through the results, kind of explaining to them what their peers were doing, what the trends were that we found, etc. So they kind of confirmed to us in this second call or second interview again what their biggest problems were. And at that point, we just told them, listen, we pivoted and we're solving for your biggest problem right now. Are you interested to explore this on a client relationship? And funnily, they were, because we were addressing their biggest fear. Or the biggest problem. And it so happened that one of our current biggest clients emerged from that report method. So, we kind of understood the persona so well, we compiled the problems, but we also pivoted our solution to cater for that problem. And that was such a natural sale. You didn't even have to sell. It was just, you had the solution and the persona had the problem. It was a perfect match. So I think that was the power of what you just called the report method.
Incredible. I mean, not only did you manage to successfully pivot, but you also to date raised 1 million in equity, half of which you raised during the pandemic. And now you're using this money to expand your team, to manage your tremendous growth. by trying to replicate the founder. Tell us how and why you're trying to clone yourself.
That would be a task for another startup to clone ourselves. I mean, we're doing something similar. We're not cloning ourselves, but I mean, when we did our report method, when we tried to understand the new persona, I think we did a really good job because we understood the persona really on a deep level. And as founders, we were suddenly able to connect with this persona because we kind of used the same language. We understood the problems and so on. And we would never, again, reach out to random people and try to sell them something they might not need. We really understood the problem that a particular persona had. And we would even discard meetings that we thought might not be a person who have that particular problem. So kind of using automation, we were able to connect really well with our buyers. And at some point, we were thinking it became kind of a game. So the LinkedIn bot would run around 24/7 and would kind of create the meetings with potential buyer personas, and we would jump on calls, which would be booked automatically in our calendars, and just hold this meeting. So at some point, it became a game, and we said, "Hey, why don't we put all of that into a process and have sales reps doing exactly what we've been doing, kind of to replicate and to increase our speed, to increase the let's say the top funnel deals." And this is essentially what we did. We tried to clone ourselves by putting all of our successful recordings of sales calls, putting things down into scripts, word for word, how we would almost walk through sales meetings. We would also put the automation part, the bot part on LinkedIn into a system, and we packaged that into an onboarding package for sales reps. And we started hiring for this year 11 sales reps who would replicate what we've been doing, and they would do that on commission only. So right now we hired 4 of the sales reps, and they actually onboarded themselves, watching something like 8 hours of content, watching me selling, watching Mark selling. They onboarded themselves, and they installed the automation part of the system on their machine. So they're basically just copying us right now, and they're running these automated campaigns in their territories, which is a different territory than for example I would cover. And it's funny because right now my job changed as well. I need to make sure that the sales reps have great quality in customer communication, which is our startup. This is what our startup is doing. So I need to do what my startups is actually doing for other companies. So there was a moment where we thought, wow, the circle is kind of closing. I just need to do quality control for my reps. And our software does quality control for customer services. And I think we might even launch another product that would help kind of me or similar personas like me do their job by controlling the quality of customer or rep communication. So this was a little bit of a funny moment there. But yeah, this is what you probably refer to when you say cloning.
Yeah, I mean, I know that founders are sometimes the best salespeople in their startups. And it's actually pretty hard to replicate the founders. I'm really looking forward to continuing, seeing how you develop your methods quite successfully. Jonathan, I recently read that Apple buys a company every 3 to 4 weeks. Has this been the case also during the pandemic? And what about other tech giants?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say overall buyers are very similar to people in that they have different personalities. So you've had some buyers that have, in essence, and Apple is one of them, that have continued business as usual. So if you look at the tech giants specifically, whether it's Apple or Microsoft or even Facebook to an extent, they've continued to print acquisitions at about the same pace they did over the last couple of years. But then you have other companies like Google that have taken a significant step back. So since the pandemic hit, Google's completed about 10 to 15% as many deals as we would have expected during a normal time. So the way in which people have been impacted is really almost bespoke to that company. And I think it's really imperative that you understand, if you're talking about, let's say, an M&A exit, to understand who your buyers are and what their personalities are. So for example, are you talking to a buyer, a specific buyer that is still actively looking at deals? A lot of times when I talk to companies and they indicate who they think the top buyers are, they may list 10 companies, of which 7, I know the company's not even at the right stage to get the attention of that potential acquirer. So they may think, XYZ private equity firm, I'll just pick to not pick a specific name, is going to buy me. But that company is, kind of cash flow negative, not EBITDA generating, doesn't have some of the characteristics or profile that that those types of buyers are going to expect. So I think it's maybe a little bit more of a nuanced answer, but what that ultimately means is that each company really does have to do their own work, by themselves and sometimes alongside an advisor to really understand who those buyers are. And then based on where your company is at, kind of how you fit those different buyer profiles.
Yeah, understand. And Marcus, from your perspective, you're one of the companies that have benefited quite a lot from the pandemic, also because of the adoption of telemedicine. I know that raising money for medical technology is always a little bit harder. Do you think that going forward it will be easier to raise for medtech companies?
That's a good question. And we will, of course, see in the next year what happened this year. But as a general notice, I think there will not be a great change of who will be investing. Of course, there's a focus on SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19 type of projects. So yes, we might be in a lucky position to actually attract one or the other investor that has a focus on that area or has created for himself a focus there. Nevertheless, we do not see that investors that have not invested in medtech are great at discussing the specific requirements of a medical product. And this is, in the end, one of the critical things to understand, that a medical product it does not work. You invest now and 2 months later you have a product that actually works, but you have to get a certification. You have to understand how you distribute that product, whether that is regulated as well. So there are many intricacies with medical products that you just have to know. So I see that rather the typical investors that have invested in medtech before, or in diagnostics in our case, are the right people to talk to. Interest has been great across the board because of the pandemic, but actually successful discussions we had with people that know their way around medtech.
Got it. We're running out of time. Last question to all of you guys for today. In a couple of words, can you summarize the lessons learned and during COVID, and also looking forward towards other crises, and give some words of advice to your peers? Dimitri, you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, I would say no matter how harsh it gets out there, there is always a way to get out of it, right? All you need to have is the information to take a decision, and you need to take the time to gather that information. But once you have information, there is always a way out, no matter how harsh it gets.
Marcus?
Yeah. So as you had mentioned, we are on the fortunate side of things. That does not mean that everything always goes well. So as Dimitri said, you have to work with the information you have and make decisions when you need to make them. And the main topic is, in our case, speed, speed, speed. Get forward with the development, get to the market, and see to it that that you get to revenues.
Jonathan, on your advice to Marcus and Dimitri and other tech startups.
Oh gosh, no, I would echo what Dimitri said, but I think the other thing that I've realized through the pandemic is, technology really has fundamentally impacted the way that we live, the way that we work, the way that we play. And the pandemic can have a temporary, maybe pausing effect on that, but it's not stopping the long-term trends. And I would argue in many ways, it's even accelerated them when you look at certain sectors, or even when I look at, for example, the interest now, the renewed interest from non-technology or industry players, even in early stage technology companies. So I think just my message would be, in part due to the resiliency of founders like Dimitri and Marcus, that a lot of the what makes these tech companies special will just continue to kind of further over the coming time, and a lot of these traditional industries will continue to be disrupted because of the resiliency that you're hearing of the people on the call.
So we all need to be patient, hardworking, and optimistic. Super. Thank you, guys, for this in-depth discussion. Very much appreciated. The floor is now open to the questions from the audiences. Who would like to ask our panelists their questions?
There are no questions in the chat now. I would open it with the first question. Dimitri, you were able to make a fundraising round last year during COVID-19. And my question would be, what was the experience you made during this financing process? And how far was it affected by COVID-19 comparing to earlier processes?
Thanks, Eric. Really good question. So this is, if we have founders on the call, my advice would be to always keep treasury shares on your books. For us, it was treasury shares that helped us to get this funding round really fast and efficiently in. Because we did hold treasury shares on our books, we were able to place that without a lot of legal overhead, with quite some speed, and on a price that we more or less decided on, as a team. That is probably something we are going to keep on our books going forward. It would, it can just save you a lot of time and a lot of efforts if you do hold these shares, and especially if crises like the pandemic hit, this is really, really handy.
Many thanks. Very interesting. Maybe another question from my side, if there are no other questions, and this would be, Jonathan, you mentioned before that there are several different government assistance program to startups in the different jurisdictions, like the US, but also in Europe and Switzerland. In Switzerland, for instance, we have the federal short-time employment beneficial plan, or also the COVID credit program. What do you think is the most efficient or was the most efficient measurement from the government for startup during the last few months to save the startup entrepreneurs and the startups in the different jurisdictions?
Yeah, so maybe looking across all of those, I would say the programs that were administered fastest, easiest, and most efficiently. So the reality is the pandemic came on so quickly and the impacts were so severe so quickly that people just had to figure out what to do to survive. And so to have those funds or those programs available, to have it kind of clearly communicated as to what the restrictions were in some cases, or what the application process was, and then to allow that access at great scale without having a lot of red tape or workarounds, to me was key. And so you saw some jurisdictions doing it better than others. I even saw, like, with certain companies, they were able to take advantage of things much faster than others. There's still companies that are having conversations around accessing some of that financing, but they're having to do, I'll say, internal workarounds in order to put their company in the right kind of bucket to get the right money that they need. That type of stuff to me is not as helpful. It can be really frustrating. So the more flexibility as there is, the more efficiency there is, the better.
I have one more question from my side. How did your teams actually, your team colleagues react to your pivots? Were they all able to work, and deal with it, or there were certain crisis situations that you had to manage?
Yeah, maybe I can share some insights on what we had to do. So at the onset of the pandemic, we were roughly 5 people working on our topic. Not everyone full employed. When we started working on the molecular diagnostics test, we very quickly got talent on board across the board in technology, in quality management, operations, marketing even, to be able to address all the different topics that needed attention for developing a medical product. So we very quickly went out of the research and technology development mode into a mode that was much more advanced, still in development, but already looking at production topics. We actually grew by about 45 people over the course of 9 months. So we are a significant team now. So actually there was no one that was against the pivot, if you wish so. They were actually very glad that we had found a refreshed purpose, and how much better can it be than what we then called saving humanity. Yeah.
Dimitri, what about you?
That's a great question. I mean, we were quite swift in deciding that we go into home office. Also, our office is closed. So within a couple of weeks, we were all sitting at home, connecting via Teams or Zoom, and chatting on the phone and dealing with a pivot in a pandemic and with a short runway. So you can imagine the strain on the team and the uncertainty that was created through the less richer medium of a Zoom call rather than being in talks face to face. This caused, I think, that our team shrank to let's say the most important people. We had to let people go, but also we saw that there was some productivity loss due to that situation where you can just turn around and have a chat with the neighbor of your desk. So for us, it was not as with Marcus. For us, it was rather the contrary. So we lost productivity. We had to let people go, and overall, the cohesive team that we had became a little bit less cohesive, and we had to do countermeasures, like coffee over Zoom and things like that. But all of that was, in my experience, limited in its effect. So I was really glad to be back in the office during summer. And I will also be looking forward to when we go back to the office after the second wave.
So maybe to add into that, Dimitri, I think you're making a great point there. Of course, starting up with so few people, we didn't have the home office problem then. However, once we started getting people on board, we actually rented a quite big flat where we could accommodate everyone. Yeah. So, and this was a really nice, typical startup setting. So empty room, about 400 square meters. And it was the startup feeling. Probably it doesn't get any startup-ica, whatever you call it. However, since then we have again moved into a new facility, and now we have a regime where we do regular testing because we need to protect our research staff because we work with the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So nobody may be infected. So we have regular testing going on, and a home office wherever possible. Yeah.
There is one last question from the audience. George is asking, what are the biggest challenges facing startups as we emerge from COVID-19? What do you think? What's the greatest challenge looking forward?
I can speak now for Midge Medical only. Of course, as our current purpose is around home testing, and it's pretty much focused on SARS-CoV-2 at the time. It's about certainly about not losing that purpose. So it's advancing the technology to not only work with SARS-CoV-2, but to work with other pathogens. Think of influenza, which also causes great pain, many deaths in Europe each year that we have gotten used to, and other fevers that you might expect more in the African scenarios. So there's a lot of work to do. I don't think that coming out of SARS-CoV-2 will be a problem. We do hope that we get there not too late.
Great. So I think we are running now out of time. I would like to thank all the panelists for the interesting insight and what you have shared with us, and also Olga for the professional moderation of the panel discussion. And I wish you all the best for the future and what's coming up the next few months. And I'm looking forward to our next webinar, which we definitely will plan in a few weeks from SECA, and wish you all the best. Many thanks for your interest.